The bow on the walker gleamed under the party lights, as if humiliation could be gift-wrapped. They laughed, glasses clinking, certain they'd made the joke of the night. I smiled, cutting my cake with a steady hand, already thinking about the accounts I would freeze before sunrise. Before we start the story, tell me where you're tuning in from, and don't forget to subscribe. The candles burned in a neat little army, 75 small flames flickering like they were saluting her age. The Kerrigan living room smelled of buttercream frosting and lemon-scented floor polish, sweet on the surface, sterile underneath. Surprise! The word rang out in unison, followed by that strange, polite applause people reserve for milestone birthdays or retirements. Virginia Ginny Kerrigan stepped through the archway, her pearl earrings catching the light. She took in the gold balloons, the banner stretched across the mantel, 75, and the sea of matching white t-shirts with bold navy letters, Team Kerrigan, uniform in print, but not in loyalty. Melissa, her daughter-in-law, broke from the pack, phone camera raised. "Oh my gosh, you look so stunned," she cooed, as though Ginny were an exhibit worth capturing. "I am," Ginny replied, tone smooth, polite. The same one she'd used in boardrooms when a junior exec pitched something idiotic. The sheet cake dominated the dining table, heavy with buttercream roses. Nathan, her only son, stood behind it, chef's knife in hand. "Big first slice for the birthday queen," he declared, grin a little too wide. Ginny leaned toward the candles. Their heat brushed her face, the smell of melting wax sharp in her nose. Her reflection glinted in the knife's blade. Composed hair, flawless makeup, the faint scar across her knuckles from a decades-old filing cabinet accident. She inhaled, blew. The flames died in one breath. Applause again. More noise than warmth. Melissa clapped her hands. "Okay, now for the real surprise." She disappeared down the hallway and returned, pushing a glossy box on tiny wheels. A walker. Collapsible chrome accents, cheerful branding splashed across the cardboard. A large gold bow sat on top, like mockery dressed up as celebration. "Just in case," Melissa said brightly, smiling wide for the camera still trained on Ginny's face. The laughter erupted fast and loud, Nathan's chuckle first, deep and satisfied, then the rest of the room joining in. Even a neighbor Ginny barely knew added a chuckle, as if the joke were free cake with extra cruelty. Nathan stepped forward, patting the box. Never too early to lean on the future. His eyes glinted like he'd just closed a deal. Across the room, Harper didn't laugh. 19, legs folded under her on the sofa's arm, she stared at the walker with a tightening jaw. Her hands twisted in her lap. She glanced at Ginny, a silent question in her eyes. "Are you okay?" Ginny placed a manicured hand on the box. Her smile was perfect. Polite, restrained, the kind that could kill a hostile takeover without raising her voice. "How thoughtful," she said. Nobody heard the steel under it. Or maybe they did, and thought it harmless. The party continued. Nathan carved the cake into lopsided slices. Melissa passed plates with exaggerated care, as if serving the Queen of England. Ginny ate her piece, the sponge dry against her tongue, and opened no other gifts. She did not mention the champagne they hadn't poured for her, or the fact that Harper sat quietly in the corner, not touching her own cake. When it was time to leave, Ginny carried the walker box herself, placing it neatly in her trunk. The lid closed with a soft thunk that sounded to her like the last tick of a clock. That night, her house was silent. The kitchen clock ticked faintly in the distance. Ginny placed the walker in the far corner of her office, beside the oak desk she'd bought the year she became CFO. She stood there a moment, staring at the gift in the dim lamplight. Then she reached for the bottom desk drawer. It slid open smoothly, revealing a thick leather binder, the one she hadn't touched in years. Gold letters embossed on the front, Kerrigan Family Trust. Her fingers found the tab she'd been looking for. The label read, Family Access, Freeze Authorization. Ginny rested her hand on it, her late husband's words echoing in her head. Never warn them, Ginny, show them. She reached for her pen. The ink was still drying on the sticky note she'd left herself. Don't warn them. Show them. When the glass doors of the granite and pine branch parted with a soft hiss, morning air followed her in, cool and bright, carrying the faint scent of wet pavement and the sharper bite of industrial coffee. The lobby hummed. Low conversation, the whir of a printer, the light clack of keys from tellers who knew when to smile and when to go still. Ginny didn't take a number. She didn't need one here. Mrs. Kerrigan? A woman in a tailored navy blazer straightened from behind the reception podium like she'd been waiting for a royalty sighting. Warm brown eyes, decisive posture. Maya Bhandari, branch manager. A grin. Legend. Ginny allowed the smallest curve of a smile. Maya, she said, you were an intern once. You asked me why we reconcile accounts before they squeal. Maya's laugh was a quick silver line through the air. Because clean books don't cry, but dirty ones scream in court. Good memory, Ginny said. I need your quiet conference room. Maya motioned her through a glass door etched with mountain silhouettes. Inside, a long walnut table, 2 ergonomic chairs, a carafe of water with lemon slices drifting like thin suns. The air smelled faintly of toner and citrus peel. Maya closed the door, and the lobby murmur softened to a respectful hush. Ginny set the leather binder on the table. The metallic click of the clasps sounded like habit returning home. She opened to a tab flagged in red. Family Access, Freeze Authorization. I'd like to restructure and restrict all shared accounts, she said. Maya didn't blink. How deep do we go? Ginny met her gaze. To the bone. Maya slid into the chair opposite, fingers already moving across the keyboard of a slim laptop. Household names? Nathan and Melissa Kerrigan, Ginny said, as if reciting a neutral weather report. Maya's eyes flicked once as the screen populated. Utilities. Electric and gas tied to a supplemental autopay from the trust. Internet, water. Their mortgage supplement, 50% top-up, monthly. A college fund labeled for Harper. With your signature as trustee. She glanced up. You kept primary control. I always keep primary control, Ginny murmured. Maya clicked another pane. You also have 2 discretionary cards authorized for household expenses. Limits are generous. Were, Ginny said. A beat. Maya nodded, shoulders squaring in that subtle way of good soldiers receiving clear orders. Making notes. Restrict discretionary cards to 0 spend. Freeze outgoing transfers on utilities, mortgage supplement, and any discretionary draws. Reassign oversight of Harper's college account to you solely. Anything else? Ginny hesitated, not out of doubt, but calibration. Flag any attempt to alter beneficiary status or contact details on my accounts. Maya's fingers paused. Funny you mention that. She turned the laptop slightly, careful not to violate privacy but clear enough. A log entry, 2 weeks old. Attempted update by Nathan Kerrigan to add himself as primary contact on the investment trust. Denied. Our system sent a notice. Ginny didn't flinch. The only visible shift was the slight settling of her shoulders, like a coat falling into place. He called it a joke, she said. They all did. Maya's mouth thinned. Sometimes jokes have paper trails. From the hallway, a teller's laugh rose and fell like a bird call. In here, the quiet thickened with purpose. Maya reached for a laminated procedures card tucked under the keyboard. We can structure this as a temporary freeze with review at your discretion, or a restrictive covenant tied to usage triggers. Both, Ginny said. Immediate freeze, covenants that make misuse a hair trigger. Maya nodded, already drafting. And communications? Formal, clean. No emotion, Ginny said. If they call, you direct them to my counsel. Trina Meyer? Maya asked, eyes glinting with recognition. Of course. Maya's hands danced. Okay, just to be explicit. Don't, Ginny said softly. Do it. Silence again, but not empty. The room felt padded with consequence. Outside the glass, a man in a neon safety vest deposited a bag of quarters, metal chattering faintly. Ginny poured water from the carafe, lemon oil slicking the surface, the glass cool against her palm. She didn't drink. Maya glanced up. You know, I started here the year you gave that talk to our new hires about fiduciary duty being love, just with paperwork. Ginny let that sit between them, the closest thing to tenderness she would allow inside a bank. Maya pressed enter. Somewhere beyond the wall, a printer kicked awake, a low, mechanical purr that built into a steady, verdict-like rhythm. She stood, smoothed her blazer, and left the room. Through the glass, Ginny watched her extract a growing stack of pages, thumbs aligning them with an expert tap-tap against the counter. Maya returned with the documents. Multiple accounts identified and restricted per your authorization. Utilities, mortgage supplements, discretionary cards canceled as of... She glanced at the corner clock. Now, college fund oversight reverted to sole trustee. You. Ginny slid on her reading glasses. The frames caught the light, throwing a thin bar of silver across the page. Line items, checkboxes, the hard edges of policy dressed in the politeness of fonts. Each paragraph was a door quietly closing. Maya hesitated at the edge of the table. One thing. Do you want alerts when they try to spend? Or silence? Silence, Ginny said. Let the decline speak. Maya's smile was small, respectful, almost fierce. Understood. A shadow crossed the frosted glass. Someone shifting in the lobby, impatient. Time moved the way it does when a surgeon steps into an operating theater. Slow, precise, inevitable. Anything else, Mrs. Kerrigan? Yes, Ginny said, closing the binder with a soft final click. When this hits, there will be noise. Don't indulge it. Maya tilted her head. Noise is free. Reversals aren't. Ginny actually smiled at that. You'll do well. The printer spat out the last pages with a crisp whine. Maya gathered the stack, 13 sheets thick, and slid the 13-page freeze order across the walnut table, a blue ink pen placed neatly on top. Sign here, she said, and the faucet closes. The freeze order sat in her briefcase like a live wire, humming under the leather. Virginia drove home without music, the low purr of the engine enough to steady her thoughts. Outside, Boise's late-morning sun hit the streets with that deceptive autumn warmth, the kind that looked gentle but could burn if you stood still too long. At her desk, she opened the binder again, sliding on her glasses. Every tab was a quiet doorway into history. Mortgages co-signed, accounts created temporarily, loans smoothed over before they turned into embarrassment. All dressed in polite language, but underneath, dependency. She started with the oldest, a checking account Nathan had used for his startup 15 years ago. The startup was gone. The account wasn't. It was still quietly padded each month, like a wound that had never stopped bleeding. One click, and it was locked. The next page, a family investment trust she'd established when her husband was alive. In theory, it was a generational safety net. In reality, Nathan and Melissa had been treating it like an ATM. She keyed in her login, the faint smell of paper and lemon polish in the air, and disabled every secondary user. The trust's dashboard blinked once, and their names disappeared. She didn't move to the next tab immediately. She let that one sit. Cutting them out of the trust wasn't just a financial shift. It was the sound of a ladder being pulled away. When she finally turned the page, her lips pressed into something not quite a smile. The property file. The house Nathan lived in, the one he bragged about owning, was still tied to her through a blind trust her late husband had created for tax purposes. She skimmed the deed language, her pulse calm, slow. They weren't homeowners, they were tenants, and the landlord's pen was in her hand. She opened another file, Harper's tuition account. The header bore her own name as trustee. She'd set it up to keep Harper's education clean of Nathan's impulsive borrowing, but now, with the freeze in place, she saw the risk. If Nathan had access through family pooling, Harper's future was one overdraft away from ruin. She reassigned control to herself alone, locking out every other party. A few keystrokes, and Harper's education was untouchable. The phone on her desk buzzed. Trina Meyer, her oldest friend, her sharpest counsel. "Tell me you've been busy," Trina said without preamble. Virginia rotated the binder so it faced her, even though Trina couldn't see it. "Every joint account is either frozen or reassigned. The trust? Stripped. The house? Still mine on paper." Trina's chuckle was warm and lethal. "You've just written them out of their own lives." "Not written," Virginia said. "Revised." There was a pause, the rustle of papers on Trina's end. Then, "Ginny, these clauses? They're impenetrable. Beautiful." Virginia took the compliment without modesty. "That's the point." Her phone buzzed again. This time, a text. "Melissa, need $400 for Harper's books. Can you send?" The nerve was almost artful. Virginia didn't type right away. She took a sip of tea, the steam curling against her cheek, the scent earthy and calm. Then she tapped out her reply slowly, making each word a quiet blade. "Ask your husband. I no longer sponsor jokes." She hit send. No emoji, no punctuation flourish, just the message, sitting there like a sealed envelope someone would be too afraid to open twice. Virginia set the phone down, eyes drifting back to the binder. One tab remained, debt recall provisions, and the page beneath it promised something even sharper than silence. The freeze had been satisfying, but Virginia knew the real pressure came not from what you cut off, but from what you called due. Her office was dim except for the warm pool of light from the banker's lamp, making the oak grain of her desk glow. The Kerrigan Family Trust binder lay open beside her laptop, a fountain pen resting diagonally across the page like a scalpel. On the screen, a portfolio of debts appeared in neat columns, credit lines, personal loans, and temporary advances that had quietly ballooned into something much less temporary. She adjusted her glasses, the frames catching the lamplight. One by one, she consolidated those debts into callable status, a financial tripwire. If the accounts showed misuse, they could be demanded in full, with almost no warning. She didn't rush the work. She clicked through each clause like a surgeon suturing with precision. At 9:17 p.m., she called Trina. "Everything's consolidated," Virginia said. "I'll need you to deliver the notices. Soft packaging, masked as updates." Trina's voice held that dry amusement that came from years of courtroom strategy. "Exactly. Just routine statements, until they actually read them." By mid-morning, the envelopes were in motion. White, clean, embossed with Trina's firm letterhead. Nothing about them screamed urgent, but inside each was the legal equivalent of a guillotine in waiting. 2 days later, the first tremor hit. Nathan was at a coffee shop, swiping his card for a cappuccino, when the transaction failed. He tried again. Declined. Later, his auto payment for the SUV bounced. The confusion showed on his face like an unfamiliar language. Melissa fared worse. A grocery order, artisan bread, imported cheeses, a flat of mineral water. Overdrafted her account. The checkout girl tried to be polite as she slid the receipt back across the counter. That night, Harper texted Virginia. "Mom's upset. I can cover the groceries." Virginia could almost hear the caution in her granddaughter's words. She typed back, "You shouldn't have to." But before Harper could respond, Melissa's name flashed on her phone screen. No voicemail followed. 3 days later, Harper stopped by to drop off a book Ginny had lent her. While they stood in the kitchen, Harper's voice dropped. She snapped at me for offering to help. Said I was embarrassing her. Ginny stirred sugar into her tea, the faint clink of the spoon the only answer for a moment. Embarrassment is loudest when it's earned, she said finally. By the week's end, she moved, her attention elsewhere. Forward, not back. On her desk sat a prospectus for a private elder care startup. The margins were lean, the leadership solid. She wired $100,000 into it, securing an equity stake under her own name. No trusts, no co-signers. The kind of investment that would yield both comfort and control in her later years, should she ever need them. It felt like locking a door she'd always meant to close. Friday evening, as she was clipping spent roses from her garden, the crunch of tires on her driveway made her pause. Melissa's SUV, glossy as ever, rolled to a stop. The driver's door swung open and Melissa stepped out, all straight posture and tight smile, but her eyes were sharp, searching. She didn't walk up the path immediately. She stood there, as if weighing whether to smile or to shout. The smell of gasoline from the cooling engine mingled with the faint sweetness of the roses in Virginia's hands. Finally, Melissa approached, heels clicking on the stone. She stopped 2 feet short of the porch. "Did you cancel something?" Virginia set the rose clippers down slowly, her gaze level, calm. She wiped her hands on a linen cloth, the silence stretching just long enough to make Melissa shift her weight. Then Virginia stepped forward, the faintest smile tugging at her mouth. "Why don't you come inside?" she said, holding the door, not in welcome, but in invitation to the next move. Melissa's voice was honey over gravel, smooth, but with something jagged underneath. "We think you're overreacting." Virginia didn't answer right away. She was already in the kitchen, sliding a porcelain teapot onto the table. The steam curled upward, scented with bergamot and a faint trace of lemon peel. The clock on the wall ticked with a slow, deliberate rhythm, each sound stretching the silence between them. Melissa sat stiff-backed in the chair opposite, expensive sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. Her nails drummed against her mug, a restless beat that betrayed more than her practiced expression did. Virginia poured the tea, steady hands never spilling a drop. She set a cup in front of Melissa, then opened the leather binder on the table. The paper inside rustled like a whisper with teeth. Without preamble, Virginia slid a neat stack of bank statements across the wood. "Everything you relied on," she said, voice calm as glass, "was never yours." Melissa's painted lips parted, then pressed shut again. She glanced at the papers but didn't touch them, as if they might burn. The front door opened and Nathan's voice filled the hallway before he did. "What's going on here?" He appeared in the doorway, eyes darting from Melissa to his mother. "Are you seriously doing this? You're making it personal." Virginia looked up, meeting his gaze like she was reading a quarterly report she already knew was a disaster. "No," she said evenly. "I'm making it proportional." Nathan scoffed and stepped closer, his hands sliding into his pockets like he was holding back the real explosion. "You think this proves something?" "It proves I've been paying attention." The air in the kitchen thickened. Outside, a breeze rattled the leaves, but inside, no one moved. A knock broke the standoff. 3 measured raps, crisp and confident. Trina Meyer stepped in without waiting for an invitation, a slim leather folio under her arm. "Afternoon," she said, in that lawyer's tone that was both cordial and deadly. She placed the folio on the table and flipped it open to reveal title documents. Crisp, official, and impossible to misunderstand. "Updated filings," she said. "Property still sits in the Kerrigan Family Trust. Beneficial owner: Virginia Kerrigan. Occupants listed as tenants. Melissa's face drained. Nathan reached for the papers like he might find a loophole hiding between the lines. You never owned this house, Trina continued, her gaze steady. And as tenants, you're subject to lease termination at the trustee's discretion. Melissa finally spoke, her voice tighter now. You wouldn't. Virginia sipped her tea, the china clinking softly against the saucer. You joked I'd fall, she said, her eyes sharp over the rim of the cup. Now I'll watch you try to stand. Nathan's jaw clenched, Melissa's nails stilled on the tabletop, and for the first time since they'd arrived, neither of them seemed to have a single word left. The silence wasn't victory yet, but it was the first sign they understood what losing might actually feel like. The roast chicken was still warm, its skin crisp to a perfect amber, but Virginia ate slowly, methodically, as if each bite were a measured thought. No television, no music, just the clink of cutlery and the low hum of the refrigerator. Across from her, the other side of the table sat empty, as it had for years, her late husband's chair. She found herself looking at it now, hearing his voice in that unhurried, decisive way he'd had. Don't warn them, Ginny. Show them. She poured herself a glass of white wine, the faint floral aroma rising with the steam from the potatoes. It wasn't celebration. It was punctuation. After dinner, she carried her plate to the sink, rinsed it clean, and walked to her study. The desk lamp threw a warm cone of light across the blotter. She opened the middle drawer, and there it was, the envelope she hadn't touched in years. His handwriting was still strong, deliberate. V. She sat down, breaking the seal with care. Inside was a single page. If they ever laugh at you, close the account. And the door. No elaboration, no comfort. Just instruction. She let the paper rest on the desk a moment longer, then set it in the fireproof box where she kept her most important documents. She turned to the other task that had been pressing at her all evening. Her will. The original draft was already airtight, but she made one change, a conditional clause. All distributions contingent upon dignity shown to the trustee prior to her passing. Her pen moved in clean strokes, the ink soaking into the parchment with quiet finality. Anyone reading it in the future would understand exactly what it meant. It was close to midnight when she heard the faint click of the side door. Soft footsteps padded through the kitchen. She didn't need to check the clock to know who it was. The door to her study opened a crack. Harper's face appeared, pale in the dim light. She didn't speak. She just crossed the room, set a folded piece of paper on the corner of the desk, and slipped back out the way she'd come. Virginia waited until the house was still again before she opened it. In Harper's neat, looping handwriting, I'm sorry. The words were small, but heavy. She placed the note beside the tuition folder already on the desk. Then, on impulse, she got up, walked to the guest room, and left the folder, now containing Harper's new tuition account details, on the bed. No explanation attached. The next morning, as she was trimming dead leaves from her orchids, her phone buzzed, a notification from Melissa's social media. A photo. Melissa in her kitchen, wineglass in hand, smiling for the camera. The caption read, "Some elders forget where they came from." Virginia stared at it for a long moment, the corners of her mouth neither rising nor falling. She could smell the faint sweetness of the orchids, hear the distant rumble of a lawnmower down the street. And then she typed, her fingers deliberate on the screen. Some children forget who built it. She hit post, set the phone down, and returned to pruning. Each snip as precise as a closing lock. Nathan didn't knock. He stormed into her kitchen like he owned the floor beneath his feet, his voice already loaded. Is this how you honor Dad's memory? Virginia didn't look up from the kettle. The steam rose in a soft curl, carrying the faint scent of chamomile. She let him stand there in his self-righteousness, letting the seconds stretch until he shifted uncomfortably. When she finally turned, her face was composed, her eyes cool as the winter sky outside. "Sit down, Nathan." He did, but with the restless energy of someone who expected to win the argument. Virginia set her teacup down and reached for the leather binder on the counter. The same one that had become her quiet weapon. She laid it open in front of him, flipping to the first tab. "This," she said, tapping the page, "is the first credit bailout I covered. You were 23. He frowned, glanced at it, then looked away. She turned another page. "Here's the student loan I paid in full before the interest could eat you alive." Another turn. "Your wedding expenses. That trip to Mexico you said was for work. The down payment for your first condo, and the second mortgage you took when you couldn't manage the first." Nathan's jaw worked. "You're dredging up ancient history." Virginia's voice didn't rise. "History is what you build on. You built your life on me." Then mocked the foundation. From the corner of her eye, she saw movement. Harper, sitting quietly on the stairs, knees drawn up, listening but not daring to speak. Nathan leaned forward, his tone sharp. "You're acting like this is all some personal vendetta." "It isn't personal," Virginia said. "It's proportional." The front door opened without ceremony, and Trina stepped in, a manila envelope in hand. Her heels clicked softly on the hardwood as she crossed to the table. "Afternoon, Nathan," she said, voice as cordial as if they were meeting at a charity gala. She slid the envelope across to him. "Formal property exit paperwork, effective immediately." He didn't touch it. "You're kicking us out?" Trina's smile was professional. "Technically, the trustee is ending the tenancy agreement." Nathan's gaze swung back to Virginia. "You can't just—" "I can," she interrupted. "And I have." There was a long pause, broken only by the soft whump of the furnace kicking on. Nathan glanced toward the sound, almost reflexively. Virginia leaned back in her chair. "You called me cold. I reminded you who paid the pus heating." Trina pulled out another sheet from her folio. "Mortgage supplement revoked. Effective today." Nathan stared at the paper like it might rewrite itself if he glared long enough. Virginia stood, gathering her teacup. She moved toward the sink, her back to him, but her words were sharp and deliberate. "You laughed at my cane. Let's see how you walk without my wallet." Behind her, the scrape of Nathan's chair against the tile was loud enough to startle Harper on the stairs. He didn't say a word as he left, but the slam of the front door carried all the fury he couldn't voice, and the understanding that, for the first time, the ground under him wasn't his at all. The notification came on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, a tagged photo on Melissa's social feed. Virginia almost didn't click it, but curiosity had teeth. There it was, the Kerrigan living room, stripped of history. The gallery wall of family photos was gone, replaced with sterile abstract prints in gold frames. Melissa stood in the foreground, hands on her hips, smile calibrated for likes. The caption read, "Fresh energy for a fresh start." Virginia enlarged the image until she saw the empty space where her portrait had once hung, the one her late husband had commissioned when she retired as CFO. She stared at the blank wall like it was a wound stitched too quickly. She didn't comment. She didn't call. She went to her office, pulled the wrapped canvas from storage, and laid it across her desk. The brush strokes were still rich, the colors deep. She wrote a single note on a yellow post-it. "Energy needs electricity. That was me too." The next morning, the portrait was on its way by courier, insured and signed for. 2 days later, Melissa's phone died mid-live stream. The video replay online was a comedy of errors, her voice cutting in and out, her face frozen mid-expression. Comments poured in. "Pay your Wi-Fi bill, girl." She didn't reply. Virginia knew why. The power bill had been tied to one of the frozen accounts. Silence, she thought, was a far better teacher than explanation. By Thursday, Nathan had found his voice. He called, skipping any pretense of courtesy. "This is generational sabotage," he said, spitting the phrase like it was an official crime. Virginia was in her study, the late afternoon light slanting across her desk. She kept her voice calm. "It's called asset control. You're punishing us for a joke." "I'm adjusting the investment strategy," she said, and hung up before he could build momentum. Instead of dwelling, she shifted her focus. On Saturday, she met with a group of women at the community center, retirees, widows, and a few divorcees who wanted to understand the difference between a bank account and a financial fortress. "Control," Virginia told them, "isn't about the balance. It's about the locks on the doors." The smell of burnt coffee filled the small meeting room. She watched their faces as they took notes, some nodding with a kind of hungry understanding. It was the first time in weeks she felt her energy move toward building instead of dismantling. That night, she sat at her desk and took out a blank card. She wrote in neat script, "To the woman who walked in and shut the vault." She addressed it to herself, sealed it, and tucked it into the top drawer. A private reminder. It was close to midnight when her phone buzzed. One new message. From Harper. No emoji, no fluff, just words that made Virginia pause. "Can I come stay?" Virginia stared at the screen, the quiet of the house pressing in around her. Outside, the wind rattled the last leaves from the oak in the yard. She typed one word back. But the reader doesn't get to see what it is. The ink from Harper's late-night message had barely dried on Virginia's mind when she made her next move. It was time to take away not just their comfort, but their walls. On Monday morning, she sat across from Trina in the corner booth of a quiet cafe, steam curling from both their cups. Between them lay a single manila folder stamped lease termination. Trust property. The edges were crisp, the language surgical. "This is the final step," Trina said, tapping the first page. "Quiet, clean, bulletproof. Once it's served, the countdown starts." Virginia's eyes moved over the legal text like someone reading a poem they'd written themselves. 30 days? Exactly 30. Virginia sipped her coffee, the bitterness coating her tongue. "Then let's start the clock." By Wednesday, the paperwork had been served, not with fanfare, but with the efficiency of a scalpel cutting exactly where it needed to. The process was so discreet that the first sign Melissa noticed was a cream envelope on the kitchen counter when she came home from the farmer's market. Witnesses later said she read the first page, froze, then read it again, as though repetition might change it. Minutes later, she was at City Hall, storming through the lobby in heels that echoed like gunshots against the marble floor. Security footage, which, to Melissa's misfortune, was later leaked, showed her slamming the papers down on the counter, demanding to see whoever was in charge of letting an elderly woman throw her family out. Nathan's strategy was louder. By Friday, he'd contacted a local news station, pitching his story like a man convinced of his own heroism. "She's gone rogue," he told the reporter on camera, voice sharp with practiced outrage. "My mother is 75 years old and she's evicting her own children. This isn't just cruel, it's unstable." The segment aired that evening, a sympathetic anchor, slow pans over the Kerrigan house, Nathan framed against the front porch like a man defending a fortress. But the problem with publicity was that it invited investigation. By Sunday, an investigative journalist from the same station called Virginia for comment. She agreed to meet, not in her home, but in her attorney's conference room. Trina was there, of course, sliding the trust documents across the table with the grace of someone who knew their weight. The reporter's eyes widened as she scanned them, a paper trail so clear and lawful that the angle of the story bent mid-interview. By Monday night, the follow-up aired. The words "elderly mother goes rogue" had been replaced with "matriarch protects family legacy from entitled heirs." The segment included a neat breakdown of the trust structure, the fact that Nathan and Melissa were legal tenants, and the history of financial dependency. The public sentiment flipped overnight. Messages began trickling into Virginia's inbox. Neighbors, old colleagues, even strangers from other states. "You're an inspiration. Teach us how you did it. Wish I'd had your courage when my kids treated me like an ATM." Melissa stopped posting on social media. Nathan, for once, stayed quiet. On Thursday morning, Virginia stood on the sidewalk outside the Kerrigan house, her house, with Trina beside her. The air was cool, faintly smelling of cut grass. She watched as a city worker affixed the eviction notice to the front door, the red letters bold and unignorable. "Vacate within 30 days, Virginia didn't smile. She simply turned to Trina and said, "Now they can count the days the way I did." Behind them, the notice fluttered in the wind, a flag of quiet victory, impossible to ignore. The eviction notice had barely weathered 2 weeks on the Kerrigan house door before Virginia's plan moved to its final stage. She didn't stall, didn't soften. Delays only bred hope, and she wasn't in the business of handing that out anymore. Harper arrived on a Saturday morning, suitcase in hand, the early sun catching the highlights in her hair. She didn't need to explain. The quiet way she stepped over the threshold said enough. Virginia led her to the guest room, now hers for the next month, and set an envelope on the neatly made bed. "For your dorm deposit," Virginia said simply. Harper's eyes flicked up, and for the first time in weeks, there was no hesitation in her hug. By mid-morning, the movers pulled up to Nathan and Melissa's driveway, a pair of box trucks, and a crew that moved with silent, efficient rhythm. No television dramatics, no shouting. Furniture padded, boxes labeled, door frames protected. Virginia watched from her porch, a cup of coffee warming her hands, the scent mingling with the faint tang of cardboard in the cool air. Melissa appeared in the doorway of the soon-to-be former Kerrigan house, her lips pressed into a thin line. Nathan trailed behind, muttering to the foreman, but no one stopped the work. As the hours passed, neighbors came and went, but more than a few lingered long enough to catch Virginia's eye. Mrs. Rayburn from 3 doors, down waved, the kind of slow, deliberate wave that said she knew more than she'd ever repeat in public. Mr. Halverson gave a small nod as he walked his dog, a silent stamp of approval. The public sympathy that had shifted after the news story was now walking past her lawn, wearing polite smiles. It wasn't just her victory, it was their entertainment. It was late afternoon when Nathan made his approach, his voice low enough for the movers not to hear. "This is revenge," he muttered, eyes fixed on the ground. Virginia didn't flinch. "No," she said, her tone even. "It's restraint." He glanced up, confusion clouding his face. She didn't elaborate. Some lessons needed space to echo. Back inside her own home, Trina sat at the dining table, a thick folder open between them. "Deed transfer is ready," she said, tapping the signature line. "Once you sign, the property's under the Elder Dignity Foundation. No reversals, ever." Virginia's pen moved in smooth, unhurried strokes. The black ink bled into the paper like it had been waiting to be there all along. The folder snapped shut with a satisfying finality. By evening, the trucks were gone, leaving the Kerrigan house looking strangely weightless without its furniture, like a stage after the play had ended. The porch light was off, the blinds drawn. Virginia locked her front door, the metallic click echoing in the quiet street. Half an hour later, her phone buzzed with a video notification. Melissa's face filled the screen, eyes red but mascara intact, her voice pitched high with practiced distress. "She ruined our lives for a laugh," Melissa declared to her followers, the camera shaking just enough to sell the performance. In the background, the empty Kerrigan house loomed like a witness. The papers for the Elder Dignity Foundation sat on Virginia's desk, thick with legal language and promise. Outside, The morning sun pushed pale gold light through her blinds, dust motes drifting in the beam like quiet witnesses. She'd spent decades building the Kerrigan family trust, brick by brick, account by account. Now she was dismantling it in one deliberate stroke, not to give Nathan and Melissa less, but to give strangers more. She signed the transfer with steady hands, the tip of her pen scratching faintly against the parchment. Every remaining cent in the trust, investments, property equity, the kind of generational wealth they'd taken for granted, was now allocated to a community fund for elder dignity programs. Housing, legal aid, financial literacy for seniors who didn't have someone like Trina in their corner. When she slid the last page into the folder, the finality wasn't loss. It was release. The first ripple came quickly. The community center, the same place where she'd spoken to the women about locks on the doors, announced the Virginia Kerrigan Financial Literacy Grant, an annual program teaching seniors and their families how to protect their assets from exploitation. The director had asked her for a quote. She'd given them one line: "A locked door isn't selfish. It's safe." Harper signed up to volunteer before Virginia could even suggest it. She showed up every Tuesday afternoon in a crisp polo shirt with the foundation's logo stitched over the heart, handing out materials, helping older attendees with online banking setups. She didn't have to say she was proud. Virginia saw it in the way she introduced her. "This is my grandmother. She's the reason I'm here." One Thursday, a local reporter stopped Virginia outside the center. "We're running a feature," he said, microphone tilted toward her. "The headline will be, 'She walked into a bank and walked out a legend.' What do you want people to know?" Virginia adjusted the strap of her handbag, the leather warm from the sun. "I want them to know you can be underestimated for years," she said, "and still choose the moment you're remembered for." That night, the segment aired. Crisp footage of her signing documents, greeting volunteers, Harper laughing beside her. The comments section filled with strangers cheering her on. Nathan, however, had a different headline. His old firm issued a terse public statement. Due to reputational concerns, Nathan Kerrigan is no longer a partner. The news hit the business pages before he could spin it, and every former colleague knew exactly why. Melissa didn't wait for the dust to settle. By the following week, she'd filed for separation. The paperwork, ironically, delivered by the same courier service Virginia had once used for the portrait. Virginia didn't celebrate. She didn't gloat. She simply folded the newspaper and set it in the recycling bin. Actions had been taken. Outcomes were inevitable. The next Saturday, Harper stopped by with a small envelope in her hand. She was dressed casually, hair pulled back, a light dusting of flour on her shirt from whatever she'd been baking. "This is for you," she said, sliding it across the kitchen table. Virginia opened it. Inside was a simple card, handwritten in blue ink. "Thanks for walking first." Virginia's fingers rested on the words, the paper warm from Harper's touch. Outside, the wind rattled the last leaves from the oak tree, and for the first time in months, Virginia felt the quiet was something she'd earned. The clink of cutlery and low hum of voices filled Virginia's dining room, not with the brittle politeness of old Kerrigan dinners, but with the easy rhythm of people who were glad to be there. Sunday sunlight spilled across the long oak table, catching on the mismatched wine glasses and the steam curling up from roast chicken and rosemary potatoes. Around her sat neighbors who'd mowed her lawn when she was recovering from hip surgery, 2 scholarship recipients from the Elder Dignity Foundation, and their parents. Laughter rose in genuine bursts, not the sharp-edged variety she'd endured at that birthday party weeks ago. Virginia didn't hover at the head of the table anymore. She moved among her guests, topping off water glasses, pausing to listen, smiling at punchlines she hadn't heard in years. No one here toasted her age, her decline, or her past. They toasted the food, the weather, the success of a grant application. On the mantel, a new arrangement had taken root. In a single frame sat two images, the glossy photo of the Walker gift from her party, bow, box, and all, and beside it, a brass bank plaque etched with her name from her years as CFO. The pairing was deliberate, a reminder of both the insult and the authority that followed. After dessert, Trina stood, glass of wine in hand, the candlelight catching in her gold earrings. "A toast," she said, smiling toward Virginia. "To the only woman I've ever seen walk circles around a trust lawyer. And enjoy it." The table erupted in laughter. Virginia raised her own glass, but didn't speak. Some victories didn't need narration. 2 weeks later, Harper's birthday arrived. She found Virginia waiting in the driveway, a keyring dangling from one hand. Parked beside her was a gently used, silver sedan. Clean lines. Nothing flashy, but solid. Harper froze. "Number you didn't." "I did," Virginia said, pressing the keys into her palm. "Paid in full, and not for jokes." The hug that followed was wordless but tight, Harper's gratitude spilling out without a single syllable. That evening, after the house was quiet again, Virginia walked past the front door and saw a plain white envelope slid through the mail slot. No return address. Her name written in Nathan's familiar, blocky handwriting. She stood there for a moment, the paper cool in her hand, the weight of it telling her more than the contents might. Virginia set the envelope on her desk, unopened, beside the photo of the walker. She switched off the lamp, leaving it in shadow. Whatever it said could wait. Or never be read at all. The envelope sat on her desk for 3 days before Virginia opened it. When she finally did, she used the same letter opener she'd had since her first office job. Brass, sharp, dependable. Inside was a single page. Nathan's handwriting was neat, almost hesitant. The words were careful. "I'm sorry for how things went. We should talk." Virginia read it once. No tears, no second pass. The paper made a soft sigh as she set it back down. She thought of all the times he could have said those words and meant them. The night he'd laughed over the walker. The morning she'd signed his mortgage support. The months she'd paid his credit card without comment. The apology had arrived years late, and several truths short. When Trina stopped by later that afternoon, Virginia slid the letter across the table. "I don't need this," she said, "but I want it on file." In the same meeting, they went over her estate plan. "I want a no reversal clause," Virginia said. Trina's pen paused over her notes. "As in, no one can undo the trust structure or beneficiary assignments?" "As in," Virginia replied, "even if someone tries to sweet-talk a new attorney after I'm gone, the answer is still no." The corner of Trina's mouth lifted. "I can make it ironclad." They worked in silence for a while, the faint scent of coffee drifting from the kitchen. Outside, the wind rattled the bare branches against the window like a quiet knock. When it came to the question of beneficiaries, Virginia didn't hesitate. "Harper," she said, "sole beneficiary." "Lump sum or staged release?" Trina asked. Virginia's eyes narrowed in thought. "Performance-based. She gets the full distribution if she meets certain milestones: education, stable housing, no outstanding high-interest debt. She'll appreciate it more if she earns it." Trina nodded, her pen moving quickly across the page. Protective, not punitive. 2 weeks later, Harper stopped by for tea. Somewhere between pouring the water and slicing the lemon, she admitted, "Mom's been asking me to pass messages to you." Virginia's knife paused mid-slice. "And?" "I didn't," Harper said. "I blocked her number." Virginia placed the lemon wedge on the saucer, her movements slow, deliberate. "Good." The next ripple came in the form of gossip. Nathan had left the state. packed up what remained of his pride, and relocated somewhere with less history and fewer watchful eyes. Boise felt cleaner without him. Virginia didn't mark the occasion. She didn't need to. The quiet lasted until late March, when a knock came at the door just after noon. A man in a pressed suit stood on her porch, leather briefcase in hand. The faint smell of winter air and cologne followed him inside when she invited him to step just beyond the threshold. "Mrs. Kerrigan," he said, producing an envelope with formal precision. "From my client." She took it without asking who the client was. The embossed letterhead made it obvious. Inside was a notice of intent to challenge last will and testament. Unsigned. A shot across the bow, but without the courage to fire. Virginia looked up from the page, meeting the notary's eyes. "Tell them next time," she said, her voice calm and razor-thin, "to bring something that might actually hold up in court." Then she closed the door, leaving the envelope on the side table, unshaken, unread again. The applause started before she'd even taken her seat on stage. Virginia, in a deep navy suit that fit her like resolve, looked out at the crowd. Rows of women in their 60s, 70s, and even 80s, faces lit with recognition. The backdrop read, "Women who took it back after 70. This," she began, her voice smooth and measured, "is not about starting over. It's about taking back what was always yours and refusing to apologize for it." Laughter, not mocking this time, but warm and knowing, rippled through the auditorium. She told them pieces of the story, never using names, but painting it clearly enough for the women in the front row to lean forward, nodding. The humiliation disguised as humor. The walker in a box. The years of quiet financial enablement. And the one morning she'd decided the faucet was closed. When she finished, the standing ovation rose like a wave. The sound filled the space, applause echoing against the high ceilings. One of the event coordinators caught her elbow as she stepped off stage. "You should be speaking nationally," she said, "not just here." By the next week, the offer came. A keynote slot at the National Estate Law Conference in front of attorneys, judges, and financial advisors from across the country. Virginia didn't hesitate. "I'll do it," she told them. When the day came, Harper sat in the front row, phone angled just right to record every word. Virginia stood behind the podium, the scent of polished wood and fresh paper in the air, and began. "Estate law isn't just about money, it's about memory, about making sure your legacy is in the hands of those who respect it, and keeping it away from those who don't." Her gaze caught Harper's for a moment. The girl smiled, and it was the kind that said she understood every line. Between speaking engagements, the world outside her circle kept moving. One afternoon, while waiting in line at the grocery store, Virginia saw Melissa 3 aisles over, wearing a retail apron and ringing up a customer's bulk cereal. She didn't approach. Nathan, on the other hand, had gone completely offline. No updates, no public comments, no presence at all. If he'd moved away to escape the story, he'd succeeded, though not in the way he'd planned. That same month, Virginia sat at her desk and signed the last trust document she'd ever draft. Every clause was where it needed to be, every contingency accounted for. The pen glided over the final page, her handwriting steady, unshaken. She leaned back, looking at the folder, feeling no need to lock it away. Not anymore. The fortress was built. The phone rang just after sunset. A warm, confident voice on the other end said, "Mrs. Kerrigan, we run a national podcast about women rewriting the rules. We'd like you to tell your story. We're calling the episode The Walker Clause. Are you in?" The grass was still wet with dew when Virginia stepped out into the morning. The early sun painted the edges of her property in soft gold, and her shadow stretched long across the trimmed lawn. She walked the perimeter slowly, hands clasped loosely behind her back, the cool air brushing her cheeks. It wasn't a hurried walk. She was taking in what was hers, every inch of fence line, every board in the porch, every flower bed she'd replanted that spring. No mortgage, no liens, no shared access. The yard was silent except for the occasional call of a bird from the oak tree. The kind of quiet she used to think belonged only to people far richer than she was. Now she understood it had nothing to do with wealth, only with ownership. She climbed the steps to the porch and went straight inside to her study. The leather-bound Kerrigan family trust binder waited on the desk like a relic from another lifetime. Her fingers traced the gold lettering before she carried it to the fireplace. From the middle, she pulled the very first will she'd ever drafted, back when she'd still believed in the promise of shared family legacy. She looked at it for a long moment, then struck a match. The paper curled in on itself as the flames caught, the scent of singed parchment mingling with the faint trace of cedar from last night's fire. She didn't look away until the last corner had turned to ash. In the kitchen, the kettle whistled softly. She poured hot water over loose leaves, steam rising with the sharp scent of bergamot. The mug was warm in her hands as she stepped back onto the porch. From here, she could see Harper locking her car, backpack slung over one shoulder. Harper spotted her and lifted a hand in a wave. Virginia raised her own in return, watching as the girl headed down the drive toward the street, confidence in her stride. The sound of the engine starting faded into the distance, leaving only the low hum of a morning that belonged entirely to her. The porch boards creaked softly under her chair as she sat. The house stood behind her, solid and still, unpaid, unbothered, untouched by anyone who hadn't earned the right to be there. She sipped her tea, letting the warmth settle in her chest. The oak leaves whispered overhead in a light breeze, and somewhere beyond the fence, a dog barked twice before falling quiet again. She thought of the day they'd handed her that walker with the bow on top, their laughter filling the room like a seal on her fate. She'd smiled then, too, just not for the reason they thought. Now the smile returned, small but sure. Not a joke, she murmured into the quiet. A lesson. She set the mug down, her gaze sweeping over the property one last time. She felt no urge to call anyone, to post, to announce. The proof was in the stillness, and in the absence of footsteps that didn't belong. They gave me a walker. I walked into the bank, and I walked out free.